In an unprecedented late-night session, Parliament cast a vote that shook Buckingham to its core. The result? Queen Camilla officially blocked from ever serving as regent. No warning, no precedent. Just a brutal, decisive blow that changed the royal line of authority forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The chamber was eerily tense as members of Parliament were summoned without public notice. Behind closed doors, fueled by whispers of mounting instability within the monarchy, a motion was introduced with devastating consequences. Camilla, Queen Consort, once quietly positioned to assume regency in a crisis, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, not for elevation, but for exclusion. The vote passed, barely. But a majority is a majority, and in that instant, the centuries-old blueprint of royal succession was redrawn. Outside the walls of Westminster, the public reeled. News outlets broke the story before sunrise, some calling it a constitutional earthquake. Within the palace, confusion turned to alarm. Insiders revealed that Camilla herself had no forewarning. She reportedly found out the same way the public did. A source close to the inner circle called her absolutely blindsided. But perhaps most disturbing wasn't just the decision itself, it was the silence that followed. No public statement from the king. No press briefing from the palace, just an echo of uncertainty lingering in the air. Almost instantly, theories ignited. Had Camilla's influence grown too controversial behind the scenes? Had she crossed an invisible line? Or was this a calculated move to tip the balance of power elsewhere towards someone more publicly palatable or more politically aligned with Parliament's hidden agenda? The monarchy, once known for its stiff upper lip and unshakable protocol, was suddenly dangling by threads of secrecy and speculation. Something had shifted irrevocably. And now, behind every headline and every closed door, the question that haunted everyone was the same. Who orchestrated this silent takedown? But to understand why Parliament took such a bold and controversial step, we must go back because this didn't start with politics. It started with betrayal. Behind the doors of Windsor, Camilla faced an ultimatum, one that would never make headlines, but would send shockwaves through every royal corridor. The woman once rising in power was about to face her reckoning. The air inside Windsor had grown thick with tension, a weight pressing down on every whispered conversation and closed-door meeting. What began as subtle disagreements soon turned into full-blown confrontations, with Camilla at the center of a storm no one could have predicted. Sources close to the palace revealed an escalating rift. Camilla, emboldened by her proximity to the throne, began making demands that unsettled even the most seasoned royals. Her focus? Regency powers. In the event of Charles's health worsening, she wanted full authority, no shared duties, no oversight. It wasn't just ambition, it was domination. But Princess Anne, steadfast, uncompromising, was not about to let history repeat itself. She reportedly challenged Camilla in a fiery exchange that left staff reeling. William, equally alarmed, stood firmly by Anne's side. Together, they formed a silent pact to protect the institution from what they saw as a dangerous overreach. What followed was a chain of explosive meetings, carefully hidden from public view, yet impossible to conceal entirely. One aide described a moment that changed everything, an incident, brief but consequential, that brought the tension to a boil. No details were made public, but insiders confirmed it forced the hand of those watching from the shadows, and those shadows reached far beyond palace walls. The whispers made their way into parliamentary circles, drawing the attention of constitutional experts who had long feared such a crisis. What if Charles could no longer rule and the wrong person stepped in? What if power became a tool for personal gain rather than national stability? Suddenly, the question wasn't just about protocol. It was about survival. The monarchy, so often a symbol of unity, had fractured behind the scenes, and the cracks were now visible to those who knew where to look. At the heart of it all was Camilla, unwavering, insistent, and, some feared, on the verge of a catastrophic overstep. And while Camilla tried to keep the dispute buried, One slip, one confidential memo would change everything. It was never meant to see the light of day. But one leaked internal memo revealed a power play so brazen it ignited a political firestorm that could no longer be contained. Buried deep within the private communications of royal advisors, the document was marked Preliminary Transition Protocol, a phrase that, on the surface, appeared administrative. But the devil was in the details. The memo explicitly proposed the preparation of Queen Camilla for a sudden and sweeping transition of temporary authority in the event of a medical crisis affecting the king. Most damning of all was the phrasing around succession. The line that triggered outrage read, "In the event of incapacitation, bypass traditional hierarchical expectation for expedited continuity." No names were mentioned, but the implication was unmistakable. William, heir apparent, was to be sidelined. The leak was surgical. The memo found its way into the hands of select media editors who were reportedly tipped off by an anonymous source with high-level clearance. Within hours, it was splashed across the front pages, but it didn't stop there. Someone had also sent it directly to members of Parliament, framing it as a red alert. And it worked. What began as a simmering internal conflict became an open scandal, with Camilla's name dominating headlines across the world. Her closest advisors were thrown into disarray. Statements were issued, dismissing the memo as draft only, unauthorized, not reflective of royal policy. But the more they tried to contain it, the more it spread. Legal scholars took to the airwaves, analyzing every word. Was it a breach of constitutional precedent? Could the monarchy lawfully sidestep the Prince of Wales in an emergency? The answers were murky, but the optics were clear. Camilla, whether by design or default, was now perceived as someone attempting to consolidate power in a moment of royal vulnerability. Public trust, already fragile after months of quiet rumours, began to fracture. Polls showed a dramatic dip in approval. Even former supporters hesitated, unsure whether this was a tragic misunderstanding or a calculated move. And within the palace, the silence from William spoke volumes. He made no public comment, no gesture of reassurance, and that silence echoed louder than words. The leak had done more than expose a plan, it had exposed a fault line in the monarchy itself, one that could no longer be ignored, because now it wasn't just a family matter, it was national. As public sentiment turned and headlines exploded, Parliament had no choice but to act and fast. This wasn't just a legal vote, it was a silent war. Inside Westminster, loyalties split, tempers flared, and one name kept resurfacing: Catherine. Beneath the polished veneer of parliamentary protocol, a brutal ideological divide began to tear through the corridors of power. At the centre was a haunting question. Who should hold authority if the king faltered? What appeared to be a procedural debate about constitutional clarity quickly transformed into a covert battlefield. On one side were traditionalists, clinging to royal precedents, asserting that Camilla, as queen consort, should naturally step in. But on the other side were the reformers' voices that echoed a nation tired of shadows and secrecy, demanding accountability, transparency, and stability. And somehow, in the eye of this storm, emerged Catherine. She never spoke publicly. She didn't lobby, didn't protest. Yet her presence loomed large. MPs whispered her name in hushed tones, calling her the people's anchor, the only royal with unshaken public favour and no personal agenda. Behind closed doors, backroom lobbying took a darker turn. Some members of Parliament began receiving what were described as nudges from palace aides, not official endorsements, but careful suggestions about the future of the Crown's image and the importance of long-term trust. And while Camilla's camp scrambled to regain control of the narrative, the cracks widened. Constitutional experts took to television panels, arguing that the current regency system was archaic, built in a different era, unfit for modern leadership. Then came the whispers, quiet, dangerous rumours that Princess Anne, long considered the monarchy's moral compass, had quietly voiced her support for the motion. That alone sent ripples through Parliament. If Anne was willing to break with tradition, others would follow. The tipping point had arrived. The vote was scheduled discreetly, cloaked under the language of routine reform, but no one in the chamber was fooled. They knew exactly what this was, a reckoning. And amid it all, Catherine, without uttering a single word, had become the unspoken alternative, a symbol of calm amidst chaos. Every glance, every hushed conversation in the Commons pointed to the same truth. This wasn't just about one woman being blocked. It was about resetting the entire balance of royal power, and when the moment finally came, it wasn't just a vote, it was a royal reset. She was blindsided. The Queen Consort, once poised to rule in absence, suddenly stripped of that future. And her response? Volcanic. The corridors of Clarence House trembled with urgency the moment the news reached Camilla. Just hours before the official announcement, a senior aide, visibly shaken, delivered the final confirmation. The vote had passed. Parliament had blocked her path to regency. No discussions, no appeal, just a swift, surgical removal of her future authority. Camilla's fury was immediate. Within minutes, the palace was in chaos. Scheduled statements were pulled back, press liaisons were left in limbo. Behind locked doors, emergency meetings convened as Camilla demanded an audience with the king. She stormed through the royal residence with questions no one could answer, at least not without consequence. Where was Charles when she needed him? Weakened by the weight of his own health battles and worn down by the unraveling public perception, he offered little defense. Witnesses described him as distant, almost resigned, unwilling to challenge the momentum now reshaping the monarchy from within. Camilla then turned to William, but he was cold, unreadable. Their exchange, though private, reportedly ended with silence so heavy it shattered any illusion of reconciliation. In a moment of rage, Camilla threatened to step back from all royal engagements, leaving aides scrambling to prepare contingency plans. The palace, usually a fortress of calculated calm, was rattled. Those closest to her described the atmosphere as pure panic. The carefully curated image of stability was cracking, and behind the scenes, something even more unsettling was happening. As Camilla's influence eroded in real time, her enemies didn't gloat, they prepared. The shift wasn't loud, it wasn't televised, but those watching closely could feel it. The Queen Consort's authority wasn't just being questioned, it was being replaced. One door was closing, violently, but somewhere else in the palace, another was quietly opening. But as Camilla's grip loosened, a new kind of leadership was already being drafted in the shadows. She didn't ask for the spotlight, but as the monarchy trembled, the people turned to Catherine not just with admiration, but with a plea. Lead us. While chaos brewed behind palace gates and Parliament debated the future of royal authority, something unexpected began unfolding in the heart of the nation. Catherine, always measured, always composed, had quietly become a symbol of endurance. In moments of national grief, she had spoken with compassion. In moments of celebration, she had led with grace. And now, as the royal house strained under public doubt and internal conflict, the people didn't look to the throne for answers, they looked to her. Media outlets, once hesitant to speculate, began publishing op-eds, framing her as the monarchy's future. Headlines praised her restraint. Commentators noted her ability to bridge generations. But it wasn't just the press. Online, a groundswell erupted. Hashtags like Number Our Queen and Number the Future is Catherine surged across platforms, uniting voices that spanned continents. The public wasn't simply admiring her, they were demanding her. Diplomats from abroad took notice too. Invitations, once addressed to the king or queen consort, now subtly requested Catherine's presence instead. Foreign leaders viewed her as the stabilizing force Britain desperately needed. And within the palace, staff began to whisper what once seemed impossible, that Catherine, without raising her voice, had risen above the noise. Approval ratings confirmed it. Poll after poll placed her far beyond any other royal, not just popular but trusted. And in a system built on perception and precedent, that trust carried weight. Parliament had taken notice. Though Catherine never uttered a word publicly, her presence had become political. She had become the quiet answer to a loud crisis, a figure untainted by ambition, but cloaked in something far more powerful: public faith. And as the old power structure crumbled under scrutiny, a silent mandate took shape, not written in law, but written in the hearts of the people. They weren't just asking for change, they were naming it. And while Catherine remained silent, Parliament was already preparing the next unprecedented move. Centuries of tradition rewritten in a single page, a new regency order without Camilla's name. The monarchy had chosen its new guardian. In a move that shattered centuries of precedent, Parliament introduced an amendment to the Regency Act so seismic, it sent a tremor through the very heart of the crown. The language was clear, deliberate, and historic. Queen Camilla was no longer in the line of emergency authority. Her name, once expected to carry temporary power in moments of crisis, was missing entirely. In its place stood two figures: William, the heir, and beside him, Catherine, not as an extension of his role, but as a regent in her own right. The symbolism was unmistakable. Legal experts were stunned. Some hailed it as a long overdue modernization of the monarchy, a correction that aligned royal succession with public trust. Others warned it would spark decades of constitutional friction. But the public wasn't interested in legal nuance. They saw truth in the ink Catherine had been chosen. Not through coronation or ceremony, but through legislation. A quiet coronation, sealed by a pen. Palace insiders confirmed that the king had signed the new order without resistance. There was no objection, no delay, just a silent acceptance, as if even Charles knew the moment had outgrown tradition. Behind the scenes, a compromise was struck. Camilla would retain a ceremonial title, preserving appearances for the global stage. But everyone inside the royal circle knew what had happened. A transfer of power, a deliberate, calculated shift. And the people saw it too. Newspapers called it the pivot, a royal evolution disguised as reform. For Catherine, it was never about ambition. But the weight of responsibility had been placed on her shoulders nonetheless. A nation that had watched her weather storms now looked to her as its future. And with Parliament's pen, that future had been written into law. Yet the silence from Clarence House lingered. Camilla had not spoken, and somewhere beneath the surface of this historic shift, another reckoning waited to erupt, one final act that could still redefine everything. But even as Catherine's future is sealed on paper, one final act looms, one that could change the monarchy forever. She won't go quietly. With one final audience, Camilla demands answers. But this time, the crown answers not with tradition, but with silence. The summons came in the quiet of a restless afternoon, when even the walls of the palace seemed to hold their breath. Camilla arrived, composed on the surface, but those close to her knew the storm simmering beneath. She had lost more than power, she had lost certainty, legacy, and the future she believed was hers by right. In the private chamber, Charles waited, diminished by both illness and the weight of what had unfolded, while William stood rigid, carrying the unspoken authority of a new era. Camilla did not waste time. Her voice, controlled yet trembling with emotion, pressed for justification. She demanded the vote be challenged, the amendment reconsidered, the course of history bent back in her favor. For a moment, the room existed in painful stillness, where loyalty, duty, and betrayal collided without mercy. Charles, frail and visibly burdened, offered no shield, no fiery defense of his wife. His silence cut deeper than any condemnation. William finally spoke, not with hostility, but with an unyielding clarity that left no room for negotiation. The people have decided. Those 4 words carried the full force of a transformed monarchy. Not anger, not vindication, just inevitability. Camilla, confronted by a reality she could neither control nor escape, felt the walls close in, not physically, but politically, emotionally, irreversibly. There were no dramatic outbursts, no last-minute pleas that could rewrite what Parliament had sealed. She gathered herself, rose with dignity, and left the room without a single public word, her departure heavy with what went unsaid. Outside, the palace machine continued its careful choreography, but insiders whispered that something fundamental had shifted forever. And then, in contrast to the turmoil, Catherine chose silence of her own kind. Through a brief, measured message of unity, she spoke of healing, continuity, and service to the nation, never mentioning Camilla, never celebrating victory, never acknowledging the storm she had quietly come to symbolize. It was restraint that spoke louder than triumph. The monarchy stood at a crossroads, bruised yet alive, reshaped by power struggles, public sentiment, and the quiet resolve of a woman who never sought to rule, yet found herself at the center of it all. The tension between loss and hope hung in the air, thick with both grief for what had ended and anticipation for what was beginning. A door had closed, another had opened, and history, relentless as ever, had chosen its path. And so, with no throne but the full weight of power, Catherine steps forward into a future history once refused to write. No coronation, no proclamation, but the message is clear. The future has already begun, and it wears a quieter crown than ever before. The shift didn't arrive with trumpets or grand ceremonies. It arrived in whispers, in subtle but seismic movements that no one could deny. Catherine, without asking, without declaring, stepped into roles once guarded for monarchs alone. Foreign envoys arrived for state meetings, only to find Catherine, not Charles, not Camilla, welcoming them with grace and command. She began hosting diplomatic receptions, chairing royal briefings, and standing in for engagements long considered the territory of sovereign power. And quietly, Camilla vanished from the frame. Her public appearances thinned, her schedule cleared, no explanations, just absence. Across the palace, royal staff adjusted without instruction. Internally, they began referring to Catherine not by her formal title, but by something altogether different, the acting guardian. Not in defiance of the crown, but in service to it, because even the most traditional among them could see that the institution was evolving right before their eyes. Across the Commonwealth, the reaction was swift and almost unanimous. From Australia to Canada, Caribbean nations to African realms, statements of support flowed in not just for the monarchy, but for Catherine's emerging presence at its heart. News anchors in Sydney, columnists in Cape Town, and lawmakers in Ottawa echoed the same sentiment. Stability had found a new face. The change wasn't forced. It was welcomed. And in the streets of London, portraits began to shift. Official displays and public tributes, long dominated by the King and Queen Consort, now bore Catherine's likeness. Not elevated above the throne, but parallel to it, representing the present, signalling the future. It was transformation wrapped in tradition, a monarchy not breaking its past, but evolving beyond it. And the people embraced it, not because it was radical, but because it finally felt real. The scandals, the missteps, the battles they had fractured trust, but here stood a woman who had endured it all. Not through ambition, but through presence. This wasn't about titles anymore. It was about legitimacy, the kind that can't be granted by law or inherited by blood, the kind that must be earned moment by moment, crisis by crisis. Catherine had earned it. Not with speeches, but with silence. Not with declarations, but with dignity. And that's what the nation responded to. Even within the palace walls, aides noted the difference. The air felt less frantic. Meetings ran smoother. Decisions carried weight because they came from someone the people believed in. The monarchy, long tethered to its past, had been pulled gently, powerfully into its future. And Catherine, the woman who never demanded the throne, now stood at the very center of its survival. And as the nation awaits Charles's next words, one truth echoes louder than any royal decree. Camilla may still hold a title, but the throne now listens to Catherine. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.